Just record. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Those of you in person and those of you here on Zoom. My name is Daniel Ware, and I'm the genealogy librarian here at the Kentucky Historical Society. I've tried to do these genealogy presentations the second Saturday of each month. Should be running, I think it was February, I think, through October, I think is how the schedule is going to run this year. And so I'm also sprinkling in special guest speakers throughout the year as well. So I've had a couple already. I've had Dave Schroeder, who spoke about church records, and I've also had Linda Colston, who talked about DNA and genealogy. And then I'll have, I think I've got a couple more later in the year that will be coming up as well. And so anyways, today, what we're going to be talking about is finding your female ancestors. I'm just going to try to kind of give you some, different types of records or suggestions that, things you may not have thought of if you hit a brick wall and finding like either, her maiden name or, just, if she just kind of just totally disappeared and you're trying to figure out like, okay, what should I look for to, pinpoint her a little bit better. So we're going to go over that today. And then if you do have any questions, you can ask them at the end and I can answer those at the end and we'll go from there. See if I can get this going. Come on. There we go. Okay. So hello and welcome. Some of the things we're going to kind of talk about along some other points that I'm going to talk about as well are, what issues, might typically occur when you're researching female ancestors, what types of resources and records that can help you, and then some other tips and tricks and ideas that you may not have thought of before that could help you. So what issues do typically occur when researching female ancestors? Some of them would be, your female ancestor may have gotten married, and usually more than likely she took her husband's surname. So then unfortunately at this point, a lot of times they will disappear or they'll become Mrs. So-and-so. I have seen I think it was even like a death record I looked at one time and it listed her as like Mrs. John Jacobs or something like that, and which didn't tell me anything at all of who she actually was. And so, you do fall into that kind of problem. So yeah, this can cause you to hit a wall on continuing your family research and following your line further, because you may be doing, your overall family, and then you get to this particular ancestor and issues like this can cause you to have a hard time. And another thing, especially when I was looking and researching some of this, a thing to also kind of remember would be, looking at like the laws that were in place, especially at the time, because that can have an effect on, your female ancestor and if she's, disappeared or not. Oh, yeah, yeah, I got some more stuff. Yeah. uh, so, basically, it's critical to understand the law at the time and place in which your female ancestor lived. Laws will help you to frame her world, appreciate her opportunities or lack thereof in many cases, and identify which legal actions permitted or required her participation. I got this from the Library of Congress. So when you research your family ancestor, it is important to look closely at the laws that were in place at the time. This could also help create certain paper trails that were left, that could be important to the historical context of your female ancestor's life. And these paper trails will typically involve important moments in her life. And, it could be, these are moments when she may have been in contact with the government, the few times that she may have been. And these records, these paper trails can help, truly identify your female ancestor in a more clarified way. And so some different records that, may come from these paper trails or be included in these paper trails that you find, thanks to these different laws, could be military records, census records, civil suits, marriage records, and record of children's births. Sure. Divorce. Okay, so a question was asked, are there any divorce records? Yes, there are divorce records. I believe, depending on when, like the year, because typically anything that's after 1910, like us here at the Kentucky Historical Society, we're probably not going to have, just because it's a little too recent, because we basically got things that are 1910 and earlier. And a lot of records that are past 1911 or later, you might want to check, would be the Office of Vital Statistics here in Frankfort. I believe they do have a statement on their website, though, that if it's before like 1958, I think you do have to check with the actual original courthouse. Because I have looked at like some of the marriage records, tried to look to see what their time frame is on their website, and like I've seen that, like that notification. So yeah, so typically you would probably either check either at the courthouse of the county that this occurred in, or the Office of Vital Statistics. It just kind of depends on the time period, I guess.
That office, Tree.
It is, yeah. Okay. And so a lot of these records, they all have the potential to produce documents that are regulated or required by law. Any of these documents may contain unique data critical to the identity and story of the woman involved. So that's why, looking at these laws and then trying to find these paper trails, can kind of help you figure out more, understand your female ancestor better. Okay, and then just kind of going into what some of the different types of resources and records that may help you best when researching your female ancestor. Those could be census records, wills, deeds, birth records, death records, newspapers, obituaries, and marriage records. Yeah, because looking at a census, that can show you where your female ancestor lived, or hopefully it can. You may find neighbors living nearby who could be parents, siblings, or other relatives. So, pay attention to the people that were around her on the census, because you may find her maiden name based off of these relatives or people living nearby. They could also help you follow her migration over time. If okay, she was living in, Fayette County in, the 1850 census, and then she moved to Mason County by the 1860 census, then, you can kind of start then looking for records for her in Mason County around that time, especially if you've gotten stuck looking for her in Fayette County. This may be the reason why sometime in between then she left and moved to this other county. And also, interestingly enough, I have found, reading up about the census, as well as, depending on when the census was taken, you may find your female ancestor twice in the census. Once living at home with her parents, and then later after she got married and is living with her husband. Because I remember there was an example I read about, and it was like, because I guess the way they would do the census, like they'd have so many people go out and take the information, and somebody may start here in this one section of the county in like May or June, and then then this other group would come in later in the year to in the other district or something later on in the year, and then take that information there. And so if she just happened to get married and like moved in with her husband over here, she may have gotten recorded twice. So so it's always interesting to potentially look out for those kind of things as well. And then there's also wills. you may find your female ancestor listed as an heir in a will. She may be included in the will of someone with a different surname than hers, and this could turn out to be a relative of hers, which could then mean that your female ancestor's maiden name may be the surname of that person whose will that is. It can also tell you more about your female ancestor's life. You may learn where she came from. If you do find, you may see, who some of her family were, or if you look in like an inventory, you might see things that she owned or things that were passed on to her from through the family. If you do look at her own will, you may also learn who her children and heirs were. So if you're stuck trying to find out who her children were, because sometimes that happens as well, you may be able to find things that way. I do try to, whether it's, especially when it comes to parents, trying to find parents for ancestors, I do look at wills, try to look at wills a lot if I'm able to find them, just based on the fact that, there's a chance that, they're going to leave something to all their children, whether they're married or not. And so, with that combination, you can hopefully usually find like a parent and child connection of some sort. It's
A will filed in county clerk's office or clerk?
the question was asked if wills are kept in the county clerk's office or the circuit clerk. I believe it's probably just the county clerk, because I know, like, in my hometown of Spencer County, my county, like our courthouse that we have like in Taylorsville, it had wills there. So so I would say that that's probably the case. I don't know of them being in a circuit, but I'm not 100% on that, but that's what I would say. I mean, that's true. That is true. That is true. Yeah, that's true. Let's see. Okay, now we're going to talk about deeds. So like wills, you might find your female ancestor mentioned in the deed in relation to someone who could be their parents, siblings, or other relatives. This person may have a surname that could be your female ancestor's maiden name. I have seen deeds where, it would be between, John Smith, and then, it may technically mention like this other man and his wife, and it'll give her name. And, you would probably have to also double check other records corroborate this, but, potentially that, wife could be the daughter, if the man that's getting the deed given to him, could be a son-in-law potentially. So, I mean, I have seen a lot of like deeds where it'll, include the husband and wife that are receiving the land. And so kind of like I was just previously saying, unlike wills, deeds may not be as definitive in proving familial connections to your female ancestor. So you would want to corroborate any connections you find in a deed with other records, such as if you can find a will or, or something to that effect. If you are stuck while researching your female ancestor, deeds can at least provide you with other names to try to research and connect to. A lot of times I try to tell people, if you are stuck looking for a particular person, just in general, like in your research, if you see this other person's name, if they could potentially be somebody of, that could help you connect to that ancestor that you're getting stuck on. It could be a relative, it could be, to somebody, that would help you make better connections. And of course, then there are birth records. This would be something to search, after finding potential parents to your female ancestor through other records. I know I have, when I've had a potential parents lined up for an ancestor I'm researching, I'll try to go find a birth record and see if I can find those same people listed as the parents. I mean, even if you don't necessarily have, like, I mean, obviously you're not going to always have the parents' names or even potential parents' names. So sometimes, I mean, it can still be helpful to, if you are able and lucky to find a birth record, to look at that, because then, it may or may not potentially give you, all the parents' names. I have seen ones where they only give you like partial names, or, or things like that, or looking through a list and they may not necessarily even list the parents for some reason. So, it's kind of hit or miss, but, you could potentially, find that way. You could also check birth records to see if these potential parents, they had a daughter with the same first name as your female ancestor. So this would be, if you're wanting to corroborate with, your previous findings. If you do have an approximation of the date and location of her birth, this can also help you with searching for her birth record. I know I have had to look kind of in the dark before and just take a guess at, they may know, oh, they were in this county or that county. But ideally, if I have like a particular date, even if it's just a guess, or, they think, oh, they may have been born in this county, that's at least better than nothing. So then that gives me at least somewhere to double check as far as the birth records go. Uh, so, yeah.
Is there any sort of standardized process by county or state where the birth records are housed or maintained, or if it's varied by county?
I have a question about the standardization of the birth records. I believe it was, I mean, I know like 1852 to 1910, from what I've learned and understood, like, I don't know if it was like a state, uh, initiative that they would kind of, they'd start it up and then they'd stop it, and then they started up and then they would stop it. And as far as I know, I think it was just kind of left up to the counties, like as far as them recording these particular records. And I know, like, due to, like, stuff like the Civil War, things like that, things weren't recorded necessarily. Because I don't think it was until like 1911 when it was like a lot of the states started doing like an official like vital statistic, uh, main maintenance and that kind of thing. So I think before that, it was kind of just left up to the county, because some counties we have, birth records for, within the 1852 to 1910 range. And in some counties we don't, and that could be either, due to, courthouse fires, or it could just be for some reason they didn't, record, for that certain year. Because I know I also heard and learned that apparently the people taking the information weren't necessarily compensated well, so they didn't try probably as hard as they could have. They didn't have that motivation, I guess. So, it was very just kind of up and down, kind of here and there. But I believe it was more in line with kept with the counties.
Would those records be more filed with the clerk's offices, or vary?
I think typically they are kept, I think most of the records are kept with the courthouse, but then a lot of records that the courthouses have kept over the years have been being given to the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. And so they do have a lot of the original courthouse records. And then we've also got, the copies on microfilm, and we've got transcribed, copies of like the different birth records, if they actually did record them for that certain period and in that certain county. And then, so yeah, I would say either at the courthouse or like KDLA may eventually get a hold of them, since they are the state's repository for records. So. We have, yeah, if they didn't, yeah, if they weren't, if they exist, we should have, yeah, everything, like all the birth records and vital statistic records on microfilm. up to like 1910, 1911 in that time frame. And it just kind of depends on if they did record those records in those certain years. So there are holes throughout, but and then some records like marriage records, we do have like certain ones before 1852, because like they still did have like marriage bonds uh and like the past ministers like returns and things like that. Like they had some of that kind of stuff like post or pre 1852. So I mean, we do have on microfilm if it does exist. So yeah. Okay. All right. I did one last thing on the birth records I was going to mention. You can also, if you're trying to find your female ancestors' children, you may want to see if you can find her listed as a mother on in the birth records. And I know a lot of times if you find an index, you can still typically they'll list even like whether they're the parent or the child, they'll list them in the index and tell you like what page they're on or where they're at in the record. So, you may potentially try to look for her as a mother if you're trying to find her children to continue the line that way. Okay. And then there are death records. You may be able to locate your female ancestors' parents' names on her death record or certificate. I have looked at, certain death records and certificates, and yeah, it'll list who their parents were. And unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily give a lot more information other than that. It may say like that they were born in Kentucky or Virginia or wherever. So, but at least some of them, may list who the parents are. And then I would also corroborate this information with other records and documents as well. Because sometimes, something may have gotten, especially if it was the witness was giving the information, they may not have, the best memory, or they may have forgotten a detail or gotten a name off, or something. So it's always great to double check with other records on that kind of information. Let's see, and you can look to see if either parent has a will that mentions your female ancestor. So if you do find these parents' names on a death record or death certificate, then you can try to look at these potential parents to see if their wills mention a daughter that might happen to have the same name as your female ancestor, and you can, hopefully make a connection that way. You can also then go back to birth records once you've gained this information to see if they are the parents, or search through other records that show a connection between your female ancestor and either of her potential parents. You may also find death records for children that can help you flesh out your family line. You may find that she's listed as a mother for, this child who has just died. And, kind of the same thing, you can take that information and try to corroborate it with other records to see if there's a connection. And now some people may not think about this, but newspapers could also be useful in trying to figure out more about your female ancestor. You may find an article that mentions her along with other individuals, and these individuals could be her parents or siblings or other relatives. And you should also, once again, pretty much with any of these particular sources, double check this with records and other resources to make sure things match up. And in newspapers, a lot of times you may be lucky and find her obituary or a wedding announcement. And, then you can find names through that. And so obituaries, you can look at them in a couple of different ways when it comes to looking for your female ancestor. One option is to look for the obituary of a potential parent that you're trying to find a familial connection to. You can try to find their obituary and see if they mention your female ancestor as a daughter or a relative, and then, potentially that might be, you know, the person who died, you know, that might be your ancestor's maiden name potentially. Or it'll at least show you somebody else you can look into to go and double check, you know, birth records and wills and death records to see if there's a connection there. And the other option as far as looking at obituaries could be looking for your female ancestor herself. You know, her obituary may give you information on her early life, such as where she was born or who her parents were. You may also learn who her husband, children, siblings, and other relatives were. Her obituary may also tell you more about her migration, if she had an occupation, what her social life was like, or other key information you didn't know before. I have seen, looking at obituaries, you know, they may say that they were formerly of this location and, you know, they've been living in this other location for so many years. We're a part of this particular community. So, you know, sometimes you may find key things like that to tell you, okay, well, she was originally from here, and then you can go and look for her in records relating to that county and that particular area. Her obituary may also tell you, oh, no, I already read that, sorry. You should corroborate any information in the obituary with actual records because, you know, once again, like a lot of these, you know, somebody may not remember something correctly, or something may have gotten, you know, misinterpreted, or, you know, there may be some kind of miscommunication and something didn't get recorded correctly. So you do want to make sure that, you know, things line up by checking like other records, like birth records and death records and wills and all that good stuff. Okay, and then there are marriage records, which, you know, ironically, you know, a lot of, you know, these female ancestors, you know, when they got married, they did take their husband's names a lot of times. And, you know, then that's part of the issue then, is when they disappear and you don't know what their maiden name was, or you don't know where, you know, anything really about her besides that she's, you know, Mrs. Smith. But ironically though, you know, sometimes you can find certain marriage records that will include like her father, you know, especially if he signed off on the wedding or was you know, gave his consent, or the mother gave her consent. And so, you know, you can also, you know, looking, you know, finding just a marriage announcement, you know, you may find the parents' names just right there immediately. So either of those, you know, ways as far as marriage records could potentially work. You know, you could actually just see them listed, and then you can double check to make sure by checking and corroborating with other records, you know, or you may find a marriage record where, you know, it lists her parents. So sometimes you do get lucky that way. Let's see, and also other things, looking at a marriage record, you may learn about her is, you know, you may learn the location and date of the marriage, you know, who she married, who she was married by, and who her parents or other relatives were, because, you know, there could be bondsmen or witnesses that could be relatives of hers as well. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, yeah, you'll see a lot of people's names listed. Hopefully, sometimes it can be very, you know, straight to the point that it was, you know, the two that got married and then the minister, you know, and then that's about it. But sometimes you are lucky and you get multiple names. And then once again, I'll say it again, you know, just corroborate it with other records. You know, that's kind of the key thing with doing a lot of this research, is to, you know, try to connect what you found with other records that you're looking at to see if everything adds up correctly.
Regarding giving consent,
Mhm.
I don't know what the current laws are. If certain age.
Yeah, he was question about the law of consent with marriage. I don't know what it is now. I mean, I know back, like, you know, back in the day, I mean, it seemed like it was, I mean, I'm not sure if it was like she had to be like 18 and older, or, I mean, I know there's like a certain age, because, you know, then I've seen later marriages where people, you know, either gotten remarried or, you know, got married later in life, and, you know, they don't necessarily have like a parent's consent. cause like I've even seen for like the grooms, like if they were like below a certain age, like there was one, and I think it was like his mother was like signing off on his marriage or something to that effect. So I don't know like the specific, like what the age would be, but I know like, especially back then, like back in like the 1800s, early 1900s, like it just seemed more like, they were getting married, like under, younger than like 18. So, I'm not sure if it was 18 or if it was higher than that, but,
The reason I asked is
uh-huh.
to shed light on, well, somebody had to give consent.
Yeah.
That's a flag to you that they were under a certain age.
Yeah.
You knew what.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other thing I'm always trying to remember too, when I'm looking at like these older records too, are like, I feel like a lot of them did stuff younger than they would be allowed to today. Like, I mean, like, girls were getting married, like, 15, 16, and it's like, now we've got more like, I guess, age restrictions for certain things now. So, uh, so like, yeah, like I always, sometimes it's kind of weird when I see things like that, but I also have seen like, it's not just like a one person doing it's like, it's kind of been, several people seem to, they get, I guess, old enough where they can, go out and, and then they just kind of go on with their life. They don't really stay like, I guess, nested in at their, parents' house as, long as we have, here, in later years. But,
Well, it's great that they
yeah.
used to get married a lot younger.
Huh?
I've got a marriage certificate
Yeah.
for like a great grandparent. Great 15.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. It, yeah, yeah, it's just, I feel like it's one, like, cause I mean, I have looked at like certain records and it's like, I don't know if it's just like a different time kind of thing, one of those kind of things, but like, now in like those kind of instances, like it is kind of helpful because then you're more than likely going to have like the father's name, included. So that's one of those times where, I'm trying to look at marriage records and, whether it's for, a woman or a man that I'm researching, it's like if I can find, their parents' names, if they're, not, this isn't like their second marriage and they're, 30, and they don't need anybody's, bonds or consent or anything. It can be useful just finding like certain names and things like that. Okay, so we're gonna get into just some kind of other ideas and tips and tricks and things like that that you may want to look at. So some things you want to think about alternate paths when researching your female ancestor. Is there a lot of times when I'm researching, I'll look at the stereotypical records that would, make the most sense for what I'm researching at the time. If I'm trying to find somebody's parents, I'll try to look for a marriage record or a death record or a birth record or something like that. But then, sometimes I may try to look for like you may potentially want to look for like a tax list or something. And if it's, if you're looking for a certain ancestor and, maybe their father is listed right beside them on the tax list, you might see a name with the same surname. And then you might want to, investigate that particular person to see if that they're a relative or a parent of the ancestor you're looking for. So sometimes, looking at like a record or a document that you wouldn't normally think to look at, sometimes you may be surprised, basically. Also, another key thing is to look at the names of your female ancestors' children, because a lot of times they will, they may include hold on, let me make sure I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, I'm going to talk. Okay. We'll come back to that. So, but other things you can do is if you can talk with relatives who may know more information about your female ancestor, talk with people who have, been working on that person for a while, they may give you some insights or some tidbits or, something. Um, You can also try to supplement your research with family heirlooms or old photographs. They may have a name written on them somewhere or included, or a name on the back of the picture. And so these things could include additional information that could give you a clue as to her maiden name. You may see her pictured with an older man, and you see his name on the back, and it turns out that's his father or her father. And, so then you're potentially learning her maiden name by seeing his name written on there. Well, I'll put that on there twice, but okay. Okay, so remember also to look at all information. That's also another important thing, because you may see certain details that, at first glance, you wouldn't normally think to really stop and look at. Another thing could be to create a timeline for her, so you can kind of pinpoint certain main events in her life and things like that. And also look at the resources that, were created by these women themselves. Your female ancestor, she probably wrote some letters or, things like that, and exchanged communication with other people. So it's important to also look at those types of resources as well. Okay, so now looking more closely at the names of her children, this could be very important because a lot of times, they may have kept the mother's maiden name alive through the naming of the children. I have seen that, that may be a certain child's middle name, or it could be a distinct first name that gets passed down, especially if it's a very distinct name that just doesn't look like a typical name you would see being given. There's a good chance that that could be the mother's maiden name. And also, I'm going to keep preaching this, when you're finding this information, you may want to go double check records to see if this name does jump out as a surname of people that were in close relation to your female ancestor. Okay. And so, yeah, like I was previously mentioned, talking with other relatives, they may be able to give you suggestions. They may already have put work into researching the female ancestor that you're researching. So they may remember a key piece of information, or they may, they remember some key thing to tell you that can help you get, in the right direction. Okay, so when looking at all information, this tip, you want to pay attention to details in a record aside from a name. If other information in a record is correct, such as the birth date, birthplace, address, the spouse's name, even if the name is wrong, it may be the right record anyway. I have noticed a lot of times, especially when people are recording information, they may, like a census record is a good example. A lot of times the people that recorded the individual's name and information, they would have done it, phonetically. So they may hear a name a certain way, and then they spell it, and it may be way off in left field than to what the actual name was. But if like other names that are included in the census look correct, like, okay, yes, that's definitely her husband or her children, or, or whatnot, or that's the right age, that's the right, whatnot, it's still good to look at that and, record that, keep a note of that, because, they may have just, somebody may have transcribed something wrong or misheard, or, there may have just been some miscommunication. You also may just find something you may have overlooked, like I previously mentioned. And so, doing this, going through a record, looking at it really closely could, help you get past a brick wall that you're facing, that you may have thought, oh, hey, I'm just completely stuck with this. But if you, think, okay, you remember a certain record and you go back to it and you look at it a second time, you look at it closer, you may see something you didn't see before. Okay, and then there is also the creating a timeline, and this puts your ancestor in historical perspective and points you to genealogical records. You want to begin the timeline with the woman's birth and end with her death. Then you also will want to, as you're going about your research, fill in the timeline with important aspects of her life. And these may include like the date of her marriage, dates of when her children were born, and other key things like that. You could potentially also, just to kind of help flesh out her story and her life, if you learned that she was a part of a certain event that happened, you may want to put that in the timeline, that she witnessed that, such key event kind of thing. And so a lot of this can just help you understand her life, and you'll kind of understand, the things that she went through better, and, puts a face to the name, and, puts a more of a story to her, and she's not just a name on a piece of paper then. Okay. And then another big thing I really wanted to point out were things that you could look at that maybe she created herself. So, you know, your female ancestor, she may have, wrote and created writings and wrote letters and sent out correspondences to people. You can use these to reconstruct her life and story. You may also learn your female ancestor's maiden name through these writings. She could have written to her father, about, what she's doing, that day, and, if she states that, this is her father, you get his name, and then you see that that's her maiden name, or she might have written to a brother or a sister, or, somebody. And you could have kept vital family information recorded that may also help you with, researching other family members in your family line. So that's another thing you can remember, is she may help, preserve other information that could be useful to you. Some examples of types of documents you might look at as far as what she's created could be journals or diaries. There's oral histories, there's letters, and then there's also family Bibles. So diaries, they're the autobiographies of ordinary women, and these may be the only existing records of their personal lives. Along with genealogical material, diaries will give you a wonderful glimpse into a woman's daily life, her thoughts, and her attitudes. So yeah, it's also important that diaries and journals, they could include information on national events and other activities that were occurring during her lifetime. So that also kind of puts into perspective the things that she might have been feeling, or the things she was experiencing. And so that can be also a useful thing to help you learn more about your female ancestor. She may have also kept a travel diary, so you may learn of places that she traveled to. That can help you learn more about, how she, what her extracurricular activities, did she go out and travel a lot? What types of sites did she see? And they can also help you get into the mind of your female ancestor and better understand her thoughts and feelings. You may also learn about the people she interacted with throughout her life. And then there's oral history. It is an important part of any family history. Not only should you speak with your female relatives at the beginning of your family history project to get vital statistics such as births, marriages, and deaths, but you should also interview relatives as you gather information. So this is more on like things that you could do to help learn more about your female ancestor. You may learn, recording oral history with your, well, there's two, I guess, kind of aspects you could go about with this, because there's the aspect of it helping you with your current search, but then also the aspect of you helping your future researchers that may get into the same situation as you down the line. Because you could record oral history with your female relatives that could ensure that your descendants have important information about their female ancestors. They may record, when you're interviewing them, they may record, key information that you wouldn't have known, but then thankfully your, future descendants may listen to this and not get into the same holes that you're falling into.
You know, in regard to that,
Hmm.
I think that's extremely important.
Yeah.
And I video interviewed one of my aunts who
Mhm.
turns 97 in 2 weeks, but for ancestors who they say that were adopted,
Yeah.
you get biological parents that you may or may not find any information on. Then the adopted parents, that whole, it's like two different families.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But another thing that comes to my mind is I've got a great aunt, far back, but say she was born, hypothetically, her last name was Slump, and it's like Jones.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But at a young age, a family that lived close to them took her in,
Mm-hmm.
and this is really happened. Took her in and say their last name was Smith.
Oh, yeah.
And they raised her from a child, and she took the last name Smith, not
Mhm.
formally,
Right.
but at some point in time, she stopped using her own, and she became Smith.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no formal record of that, but
Right.
I've had family members tell, more than one family, tell me
Yeah.
that that's what occurred.
Yeah, it was just pointed out to me that, when people are adopted, and they may not necessarily have the birth parents like information, and like oral histories could be very beneficial to, learning certain information that you may have not learned otherwise, due to being adopted, and, the issues that come with, having records and things like that. So yeah, so basically moral of the story is oral history, recording it now could be very important to preserving information for future generations. You also may happen to, be able to locate an oral history that your family ancestor or somebody that knew a lot about your female ancestor may have recorded, and then that can help you with the information that you're trying to research now as far as learning more about your female ancestor. You may, listening to an oral history, you may learn things such as what she did in her everyday life, who she married, what her occupation was, if she had children, what events she witnessed, and many other useful things that you weren't able to find out about her before. I know I have seen several different types of oral histories that may be specifically related to a certain event or a moment in history. And so it'll be those individuals' perspectives of what happened on that day. And so, things like that can be really useful. I do also want to point out, and this is kind of a warning with oral histories, sometimes could be that, the person being interviewed, unfortunately, they may be getting interviewed like years later after what, the event happened. And so, they may not remember everything quite as, clearly as they did, the day of. So, sometimes depending on how much of a space there is between what the topic is about, when it happened, and then when they're getting interviewed, the information may not be quite 100% correct. You just have to kind of, take it as as it is. And, you could potentially still corroborate with other records if you're able to see what matches up. But I did want to give that warning just on the off chance. Okay, and then there's also letters. These can be vital to learning more about your female ancestor. Many letters included key information such as births, deaths, marriages, and other news items. There may have been, even interesting gossip between her and her friends that you wouldn't have learned of otherwise, which, things like this can be interesting because it can show you, that she was a person, she laughed, she told stories, she, told tall tales potentially, it's like she wasn't just a static image or just a name on a piece of paper. She was, she had friends, she did things. You may also learn what daily activities she participated in or the relationships she may have had, who her friends were, who her family were, who her husband was, things like that. These letters, they can help fill out missing pieces in your female ancestor's life and story. And like I've previously mentioned, you may learn of certain family members she had that you didn't know about, or you may learn of a certain date that might lead you to a specific record, or, things like that. Letters were also an important way for people to communicate with each other. Your female ancestor may have stayed connected with friends and relatives by writing letters to them or by receiving letters written by them. And you may also learn something new about her through the letters that were written by her friends or relatives. They may tell you something. If you know of a friend or a family member that wrote to her, or, wrote about her, you may learn something important that way as well. Then there's the family Bibles. These can include vital information such as births, marriages, and deaths. And a lot of these are useful because they'll have these records that would have been recorded before they actually really started recording vital statistic records. So, you may find, an early, 1700s birth, record. And so a lot of times, you're not going to find that just because they didn't exist like officially at that point. Many times these Bible records, they were kept and recorded by the women in the family. And in this way, you may also learn of your female ancestors' maiden name as well. You may see, her family listed, and then once again, take this information, corroborate it with other records, and see if you can make connections that way. But yeah, it can be useful in finding key information that may have not started officially being recorded by the counties or the states, at the time. So that can be very useful as well. Okay, and that's about it. Here's my contact information. Got my email and my office phone number. So if you do anybody on Zoom or in person, you have questions for me at a later date and you think of something later on, you can hit me up, and I'll try to help you the best I can. That's it. Do we have any questions?
Well, and share your presentation, email.
Yeah. I can, I was gonna say, yeah, I can share this presentation with anybody interested. I'll need to, if anybody needs my email again, here's my email. So that way, if you want to email me and I can send that to you, that'd probably be the easiest way. So I'll leave that on there so people can have time to look at it. Let's see.
Another source that came to my mind,
Hmm.
cemetery records.
That is true. Yeah, there's,
You can see me on the back of headstones.
right, yeah.
Son of, daughter of.
Right, yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was pointed out that cemetery records could also be useful as far as this research. Yes, because you can find, sometimes tombstones that'll have the names and it'll say, yeah, son of or daughter of. And so that can also be and that actually does remind me, I have seen, like, even in some of like our because we do have like cemetery record, like books, like in the different counties that were like inventoried by people. Sometimes I know, I can't remember which one it was, but I know there's at least one I've seen, and it was almost like a done out like a chart almost, where it had like everything like squared off, and that one, it actually would say like if they were like the wife of or son of, or like in this other column. So yeah, sometimes you may find something like that that could be useful as well. Let's see, was that okay? I'm not seeing any questions in chat. Do any of the rest of you have any questions I can answer? Okay, all right. Well, I guess then that is about it. I do thank you all on Zoom and all of you here in person for attending. The next presentation will be the second Saturday in June, and it will be relating to the census, I believe, is the one I've got up next. So, so thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.